When I was 7, my parents agreed to let me play baseball at Franklin Township Little League. And so the night before the annual opening day parade for baseball, and then of course our first game, I was so excited I didn't know what to do with myself. So what I actually did was I decided to lay out my uniform. I laid out the pants and the shirt, put the hat where my head would be, my stirrups, socks, my cleats were down where my feet would be. And my mom jokes, she said when she walked into the bedroom, it looked like the Wicked Witch of the West had just sank into the floor. It was like a chalk outline of my body in my baseball uniform. I was so excited that I started laying out my clothing and thinking about that. A few years later, when I played football for Roncalli High School, we had again, that getting dressed for the game was a big part, took a long time, it was a big part of the ritual. You know, putting your pads in your pants, the belt, you know, getting your jersey ready and your shoulder pads, cleaning your helmet, getting taped. Sometimes it took over an hour to get ready. One of the things too, our coach actually made us take our cleats home the night before the game and clean them. And they would tell us, when you're cleaning your stuff and getting ready for the game at home, of course I was using my mom's dish rag, so I always got in trouble for that, but our coaches told us when we were cleaning our shoes and polishing them and getting them ready for the game to think through the game, to imagine the situations that we had practiced, the new plays that we had put in, to kind of use that as an opportunity to get ready for the next game, the next day. And in fact, it being a Catholic school and being very much about discipline, we were actually, the coach would kick us off the field and make us go back to the locker room if our shoes were not ready to go for the game, or if our helmet hadn't been cleaned. We got kicked off and had to go back and get cleaned up before we could come out for the game. Preparation, getting ready when we're excited. When there's something that's big happening, again, that preparation was key. And now that has actually translated into, or carried over into, my priesthood. This is a gift that someone gave me in my ordination, and it hangs, or I keep it back in the vestry where we vest. These are ancient prayers that the church has for priests as you put on each item and get ready for Mass, each of the items that you wear. And in fact, it actually begins, there's a prayer, the first thing we're supposed to do is to wash our hands. So I'm sure you're all glad to know that. We wash our hands and there's a prayer for that. Give virtue to my hands, O Lord, that being cleansed from all stain I might serve you with purity of mind and body. And then it goes through, there's a prayer as you put your alb on, and a prayer for the cincture and the stole, and then finally the chasuble, the outer garment that we wear. And so again, this idea for me is very important of kind of preparing myself for this via what I'm doing in leading up to this celebration, and in fact even involving oftentimes what I wear. In today's gospel, Jesus says, when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. And the king said to his attendants, bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. It sounds a little intense. G.K. Chesterton said that the church is often accused of making Jesus seem mean, overbearing, and harsh. But the saintly writer Chesterton went on to say that it is often the exact opposite. Perhaps you've seen the signs, no rules, no judging, just Jesus. The story that signs like that suggest is that the church has somehow added stuff on top of Jesus. And that Jesus is, in some people's minds, kind of like a surfer who just kind of wants to let everything ride and doesn't have anything that he really asks of us. I think quite to the contrary, the church has been given the task of sometimes softening the blows of Jesus or the commands or requests of Jesus, and today is no different. There are two references made in the gospel by Jesus to himself that seem quite unsurfer-like. First, he sends his angels to destroy a group of people and burn their city. And in the second part of the story, the king, being Jesus, binds people by their hands and feet and throws them out into the darkness for not being properly clothed at the feast. And here we are, gathered at another feast, or perhaps we should say, the feast. And the gospel speaks to us just as much today as it did 2,000 years ago. One summer weeknight, when I was a seminarian, I went down to a mass downtown where I was living. My whole life, I had mostly been to mass in jeans and even shorts sometimes. That day, the priest gave a homily about how we ought to never wear shorts to mass. And I was so thankful that I had just gotten off work at the hospital, because otherwise I probably would have been in shorts, even as a seminarian. The priest's tone that day was probably a little harsh, but again, the original point. Jesus in today's gospel is pretty tough himself on the issue. Jesus goes kind of shock and awe in today's gospel. Bind them and throw them out. Strong language. But the message of the church on this, I think, is softer. Not that we change Jesus' words, but again, I think we are asked sometimes to soften them. We are encouraged often, maybe you've heard the phrase, to wear our Sunday best. But there's not a dress code here at St. Malachy or anywhere else in any other Catholic church. As a priest, I don't judge people who have made no effort to dress up in any way for Mass. I really don't. Because dressing up for Mass or wearing our Sunday best isn't something that anyone ought to do for me or for Father Joe or Bishop Coyne or anyone else. I don't judge people, and I hope that we don't judge people either. It's not about us figuring out what someone else ought to be wearing to Mass. I think we do feel sorry sometimes for people when it's very apparent that they probably don't realize exactly what is happening here at the feast. But again, we don't judge. We get dressed up not for God. Jesus asks us to wear proper attire to the feast for ourselves. When we put some effort into our coming here, it is better for us. I like to think one of my favorite television shows of all time was Emeril Lagasse, the cooking show. And he would often strut around the stage and get real animated. And one of his favorite phrases was he would ask the audience, "Do you want me to kick it up a notch?" Usually that meant alcohol or heavy spices. But I think that phrase is one that I think applies for us in relation to today's gospel. We ought to be people who, whatever our state in life, when we come to Mass, the way we dress, but also the way we prepare. It's not that we're obsessed about clothing, but again, because just as it did for me when I was 7 years old, and again as a football player in high school, it shows that there is a deeper preparation that's taking place, and that's what Jesus is wanting for us. Every Sunday in the seminary, we had to wear a suit to Mass, and that was such a great practice for me. It reminded me that what I was about to do was not ordinary. Something special was happening today. I wasn't slapping on my basketball shorts or my golfing clothes. I was kicking it up a notch. And that served no greater purpose than to wake me up to what I was getting ready to participate in. The church doesn't have a dress code here or anywhere else throughout the world. For most of our friends in Haiti, denim would be considered a luxury. And that's the whole point. It isn't about looking a certain way. It's about kicking it up a notch and training ourselves to think that something different is going on today. That's why I love the phrase Sunday best. We do well to wear our best, whatever that is. We don't have to worry about looking around and judging what everyone else is wearing, because only we know what our situation in life is. Only we and God. And parents know that with young people it often takes training. At Ritter, we have to constantly work with our young people to teach them about appropriate attire for Mass. But as we say in the office on Mass days when it's going crazy and kids are being sent down for not being dressed right, we remind ourselves it's a battle that we believe is worth fighting. Parents, you should feel empowered to require your children to meet a certain level of attire for Mass. After all, you pay the rent and buy the groceries and the gas. A lot of people in the world today reject the invitation to come here to this feast in the first place. And Jesus notes that in the gospel. That, in fact, is what all of the first half of the gospel is about. All of those who reject the invitation to be here in the first place. You have accepted the invitation. You have come. And that is always a great thing. For those of us, those of you who are here, phase 2 of the gospel is addressed to us. How do we prepare ourselves? Not just with clothing, but how do we prepare ourselves before we come? What kind of effort do we put into our attire, into everything that we are about here? What kind of effort do we put into our preparation for the feast that we have been called to? Let us be people who heed that invitation to draw closer to Christ, who is the feast, by preparing ourselves worthily for this encounter.